Hi, I'm Metta Spencer, and today we're going to California for a trip that I'm very happy to take to meet a wonderful woman that I've been looking forward to meeting for several years, Hillel Elver. Hillel Elver is a professor of law at the University of California, Los Angeles, and I think also teaching in Britain sometime. I don't know how you do that. Hope you have good connections that you can do by Zoom or something.
Not always.
It works?
Sometimes.
Okay. Well, it's wonderful to meet you because what I've been looking forward to is talking to somebody who's a real expert on famine. You know, one of the 6 global threats that we as Project Save the World try to address is the prospect of famine. And you have been the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food. And I think you said you finished it in about 2 years ago, that role. And so now we can reflect on what you've learned from that experience and what you have to share with the world about how we're going to prevent famine. So a good afternoon or good morning to you, Hillel Elver.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. My apologies that I wasn't able to meet with you before because when I was special rapporteur, it was so busy, extremely busy schedule. And then 2 years because of COVID, I was overseas. I stayed in Turkey and with a limited access. So it became long time to meet. Thank you very much.
Now, let's talk about food and the shortage thereof, because I think there have been so many things that have happened in the last little while that probably changed the geopolitics of food, that we may need to consider how soon the prospect is that there will be famine. And if there is a real shortage of food globally, what is likely to be the worst cause of it?
As a special rapporteur, our role is taking a kind of global picture, look at the global issues in relation to right to food and access to food, and looking at specific problems of the time. And every special rapporteurs have a different kind of global spectrum, which we have to look at the general pictures. For instance, earlier special rapporteur, when he became which Olivier de Schutter in 2008, there was a food prices crisis in the world, 2008, 2009, and he focused on basically food trade and food prices, what are the impacts, financialization of the food system, and he focused on that. When I became special rapporteur in May 2014, there was a kind of increasing starvation around the world, basically because of conflict situation, which basically East Africa and the sub-Saharan African countries, multiple famine was occurring since World War II, which never happened. So that was a kind of important period. At the same time, multiple countries were struggling with famine, not the entire country, but some regions, some pockets on that. And this is now continuing. It never ended because war situation was actively continuing. For instance, South Sudan, Northern Nigeria, Yemen, Syria, now in Afghanistan, and very recently in Ethiopia, Tigray region was still is in a very bad condition on famine. The famine, as you know, it's a little bit different than food insecurity, because food insecurity, as you know, as the definition, it could be a kind of not permanent position and non-permanent conditions, and would not be a as serious as famine and starvation, because people are not dying because of food insecurity. They don't have an adequate food and nutrition, but still they survive. But the famine is much more severe, which, as you know, there are 5 levels of the food insecurity. This is the 5th one. First and second is a normal food security issues in a certain pocket, but not very serious. And it doesn't have to be intervention from outside, especially from the United Nations. But level 3 food security, level 4, and level 5th. The 5th is the serious version, starvation. 3 is severe food insecurity. 4 is needs outside kind of aid or help. And the 5th is, and people are dying from starvation and hunger.
Now, when you traveled around doing this rapporteur job, was it your role to classify the situation that you observed, or does somebody else make that determination? If so, what kinds of things are you looking for? How do you go about, or how does anybody go about deciding what level is in existence in any one situation?
But it's interestingly enough, when you look at the right to food mandate, you don't see that in the mandate. So we are not in the first place going into countries searching for famine. This is basically a more United Nations special agencies, which is World Food Program and FAO, or other organizations that they are looking at the conditions that are severe. In Right to Food, Special Rapporteur is basically looking at, in general pictures, how people can access to food and whether or not available food and accessible and also appropriate and safe and sustainable and available for without any discrimination. So because of this general mandate, when we go to the countries, we see the general policies of the food system, not only also famine, but also nutritional issues. Malnutrition is very, very important. So many of the countries that I visited, except Zimbabwe, there was no famine situation. The famine-like situation are basically in war zones, and the United Nations is reluctant to send special rapporteurs on this particular area. And basically, they are the more security-oriented part of the UN are able to access this. For instance, you are not able to access to Yemen. And also, as special rapporteurs, we have to ask to the governments whether or not they accept us. Mm-hmm. If government of Yemen is accept that, we could have gone maybe, but basically conflict situations, countries don't like the special rapporteurs come and messing around, because if something happened from the security perspective, they will be responsible. So the special rapporteurs are basically, instead of going into the famine conditions in the first place, they are much more looking at behind and larger picture. But what I did, I was very much worried about the famine situation. So I put more emphasis in my report, the famine and the starvation, unlike the other earlier special rapporteurs, because they did have a different kind of situation in their period. For instance, now this special rapporteur is looking for COVID situation, because after COVID, the food insecurity become very problematic. And very recently, come back again the conflict situation because of the Ukraine. So
Mhm.
all special rapporteurs are dealing with these issues based on general global conjuncture, geopolitics, and economic situation. All these things. Starvation is one part, but not the whole part.
Mhm. Actually, that's very interesting. To me, I made that discovery early on because when we started off with the idea we wanted to address famine, I kind of in my own mind was making a distinction between the chronic hunger or malnutrition that is chronic around the world and has been, with us since time immemorial. And I was thinking of famine as a crisis that an urgent situation where a billion people might starve or something.
Yeah.
So, but then when I started looking for experts, I found that the world of food experts seems to be divided not in two, because there are two halves, but they're not equal size. That is, most people are working on food and agriculture and nutrition and the notion of the role of food in health and in the economy and whether and sustainability and all of those normal things that even you and I have to think about now and then. And but when I said, well, let's talk about famine, they'd say, well, that's not my field. And so I discovered that the people who specialize in famine really think of it as a human rights issue or an issue related to war and peace. That famine, since for decades, I suppose, has been the result of some intentional deprivation of food on the part of one person or one group over another, as a way of starving them into submission or something. So the people who do that kind of work are, not preoccupied with the vitamin content or the, whether rice is going to be grown in seawater or salt water or what. Those issues. They're much more interested in putting together some kind of international treaty, that would punish people who do human rights violations.
So you are absolutely right. There is some kind of looking at the issues from the perspective of specialization in certain areas, but we then lose the general picture, how we're going to respond. Because if we can't look at the whole picture from the general food and agricultural policy system-wise, we will never be able to starvation at the very end. So when the starvation and famine occurs, it is very difficult to respond. It is more costly human-wise and economic-wise, and most of the time is not very successful. We lose people, especially children, dying. So this kind of amnesia, what I said, is a very interesting. We keep talking about, for instance, sustainable development goals, which 17 goals have to be together. There's interconnectedness, interdependentness. Same thing about the human rights. When we talk human rights are interdependent, but we never look at this interdependency properly. There's a kind of specialization institution in the global also order that affects experts, either civil servant or academics, looking at the kind of only their own area. So that's a kind of, I think, big mistake, and maybe not mistake, maybe our educational system brings us that kind of specialization. For instance, when I talk about, well, that kind of agricultural production system is wrong, they tell me, well, you are a lawyer. How do you know the system? How do you produce? Well, you have to look at what are the consequences of these production methods to people. to environment,
Mhm.
to general picture, then you have to find the solution accordingly. Or, for instance, if you talk about the right to food is important in terms of global supply chain, they said nothing to do with the human rights, because global supply chain is basically run by corporations, the private sector. Yes, but if you don't control the private sector, the role of the government is missing there. They said this is nothing to do with government. Well, if you exclude the government, you're not going to solve anything. So because private sector is not going to look at entire human well-being, they're going to look at the profit perspective. So there is this kind of misunderstanding, or not misunderstanding, but basically very much economistic view looking at the global food politics. That's
I just love what you're saying. I think that is so important. It is so important. And yet, I mean, institutionally, what would you do to kind of change? It's really a matter of focus, because if people just widen or narrow their focus a little bit, change it, it's obvious that these things are interdependent. You don't have to convince anybody, but it's not apparent in terms of the work that people do. They
always say we have to look at the system approach. For instance, recently UN Food Summit, maybe you followed it in September.
No.
United Nations organized UN Food Summit and Food System Summit, and they've made it. This is the first time, which was not the first time. United Nations has several of global food conferences since 1970s, but this was basically more looking at from the economistic perspective. So many of the NGOs didn't like this Food System Summit view because they felt that they were excluded. Only the economistic way of, for instance, World Economic Forum, all scientific institutions are trying to solve the problem, but the human rights, right to food, and some kind of fringe NGOs, let's put it this way, were not part of this understanding. And at the end, the solutions come big kind of way of dealing with production-oriented kind of policies. For instance, if you ask anyone else here in, let's say, again, IMF or World Bank, although World Bank recently changed their view, the first thing now they are talking because of the Ukraine war, we have to produce more. More production is very important. It is not. You can make more production, but you cannot still solve the food insecurity problem, because food insecurity needs much more social issues and political issues, governments' political will, international organizations' political will to look at more global needs, more global security, more global solving hunger issues rather than national interests. We always look at if you look at the governments, they always follow the national interest. If you look at the international organization, they only follow their own mandate. So that becomes not very good. Yeah, it's a first of all, we have to change state of mind, how we look at the problems of the world. How do we solve? First of all, we need solidarity, right, among the big time players. If you look at the COVID-19 vaccination problem, now in developed countries, almost 100% of people got 2-3 vaccines, but in the developing countries, only 20% get enough vaccination. 80% never been able to reach this. So how are we going to solve this if there is no solidarity? How are we going to solve this if we get rid of the copyright rights and a kind of domination of the pharmaceutical companies for the human betterment, if we can't do this, we can only give a sort of charity. They do give the charity. They don't give the formula of the how to produce your own vaccine. So you are relying on the charity. Same thing, how to handle the famine. They basically say, okay, we're gonna give more money World Food Program, and the World Food Program will go and give them more food. You cannot solve famine just like that. That's not possible. You have to reestablish already broken system in these countries. You have to, first of all, reestablish the secure, peaceful environment and establish institutions and make kind of equal access to resources, women and men, rich and poor, rural or urban. These has to be equally taught. So then we can have a long-term policies that never come again in 2 years,
Since Amartya Sen and Jean Drèze wrote their book about how democracy is a situation that prevents famine, that people don't have famines if they have political rights. So it becomes a political dynamic. And for a while, you would say, there were no famines except in situations of war or human rights abuse. But now, I mean, with COVID, the coming of COVID has to mean that the access to food or the production of food will be affected. I haven't seen any work on that, by the way, but I'm sure somebody's looking at that. And now with the war in Ukraine, I'm hearing, oh my goodness, we're going to have a famine or people in North Africa anyway, because they depend on the wheat from Ukraine and Siberia. And so there's going to be a shortage of food that way. And then I've got other people who are on my show talking about global warming, and they're predicting, well, just climate change alone is going to be back in the picture again, and that's going to be a major cause of famine. So for the first time, the list of dynamics of causes must be changing every year or two.
Well, of course, for instance, first time United Nations reported in Madagascar, the first famine occurred just because of the climate change. There's no other reason, no war, no political conflict, but just only climate change, which is continuing drought. And they are sort of in a very remote areas. There is no possibility to bring the food without significant expenses. And the country is, of course, poor. So the Madagascar is the first example that famine can occur just because of the climate change. Generally, if you look at the famine situation, it does not occur only the war situation. It has to be more deeper problems that coming, for instance, not having the significant human rights, not having the democracy, not having the good governance, and economic conditions, volatility, and or post-conflict areas like Afghanistan, for instance. Afghanistan is a good example. No more Afghanistan right now, no war. But now, because impact of the war is going on, and also economic sanction, people forget about the economic sanction. Economic sanctions are extremely important to create very severe hunger, maybe even famine. Afghanistan is becoming like that because Afghanistan is under the economic sanction by the United States. So it will happen in Russia too right now. And it happened in Zimbabwe because of the economic sanctions. So not only one thing. one after another, as you said, things are coming together. So COVID-19, for instance, double the food insecure, severe food insecure. Now it's from the 110 million, 113 million jump from 2019, now 2020, 265 million, just because of the COVID. Double.
Jobs or starvations or what?
No, starvation. That's a severe food insecure, which is level 4. It's about to go to starvation. So they are at the edge of starvation. It was 113 million in 2019. Now 265, even going to 300 million after the impact of COVID. So COVID is impacting too. So not only climate change, drought, or economic problems and sanction altogether. Always together.
As a special rapporteur, you go to a country and you can see that you infer that really the problem that they're facing is, let's say, COVID, or that it's really some human rights deprivation, and that there shouldn't be sanctions. To what extent can you make recommendations about topics of that kind? Is this tricky for you to say, United States, you should not put sanctions on Afghanistan now that you've left the country?
I'm not special rapporteur. I would have said exactly what you said, but now the current special rapporteur is very much focusing on this issue too. He is also very much against economic sanction. So the a good part of becoming special rapporteur, we are independent. We don't have a boss. UN Secretary General or Human Rights High Commissioner cannot say anything to us because we don't have a salary. We work for honorary basis. So we are not civil servants. We can say anything we want. So I did say in my report, and still this special rapporteur is saying very strong recommendations, because economic sanctions, unilateral economic sanctions, are seriously adversely impacting human rights. Not the few people top. The few people top is handling their way one way or another. But the general picture, the ordinary people cannot have such an opportunity like the upper, because United States ambassador told me that in Zimbabwe, we only sanction 3-4 companies and 3-4 people. But because there's a sanction, international organizations don't give any money to the government. So international organizations cannot access, cannot help. World Food Program cannot come in. If they come even, they come through some kind of NGOs. So then the international help or international trade significantly reduce when there is an economic sanction. For instance, in Russia right now, it's an important example under the series of sanctions by the United States and by the European Union. But some other countries don't follow it. They don't follow it, but it's so restricted using money in and out from Russia. Even you don't follow the sanction, it's very difficult to do the trade. So then affects in long term ordinary Russians, not the oligarchs.
Well, that's always the really tricky part, because people say, if you ask people in government when they're talking about imposing sanctions, they say, we don't want to hurt the ordinary people.
Yeah.
We just want to that we just want to do, impact on the elites or the ruling people. Well, okay, if you can do that, and I'm not, you seem to be convinced that it's not really easy to do that. That certainly I would personally think the Magnitsky law is a good one, but maybe you don't even think that's the case. Maybe there are impacts that hurt ordinary people from that. What do you say?
But I don't know this law you mentioned.
This is the Magnitsky Law. There's a guy named Browder who was a very important. Well, he owned a whole lot of money in Russia, and his lawyer, a guy named Magnitsky, found that the government was stealing, and I've forgotten what kind of corruption, but a big time stealing. So they threw him in jail and basically beat him to death. They killed him. The Putin government. So 5-6 years ago, Browder took this really to heart because he felt sorry that his own lawyer had been killed because of his activities. So he pressed the U.S. to institute a thing where they have a list of corrupt oligarchs, and they don't let them come in. They don't allow them to send money in or out. They, a number of financial transactions that were meant to hurt them, and just to hurt the oligarchs. But and there are a number of other countries now have adopted the same policy, including Canada. So I kind of think, that is really the way to do it. If you, in fact, can take their yachts and their villas and, their mansions and that sort of thing away from them without making ordinary Russians go hungry,
Well, it is very difficult to judge right now because it is very new recently, although this case is a little bit older than the Ukraine war, what you mentioned.
They're stepping it up, because of the Ukraine war. They've greatly increased the number of oligarchs and people that they are including in this Magnitsky law.
But United States excluded Russia from the IBAN system, banking system. So how are you going to make it? How are you going to buy and sell if you are not oligarch or if you are nothing? I don't know. I can't answer.
I have a young Russian friend who said, well, I can't pay my subscription to the New York Times.
Exactly.
Because I think his credit cards won't work and things like that. So, but I mean, he isn't going hungry. I don't think any of them are. So far,
they're not going to go hungry right away. We have to wait 6 months and a year. It depends on this war, how long it's going to last, and how severe sanction will continue against Russia. Because Russia is not a country like Zimbabwe, for instance. Zimbabwe is a country in Africa. It has a maybe regional power because they were also very significant agricultural country to producing. So it affects the region. But Russia, whatever Russia, it affects gas and energy sector and the food sector significantly. And fertilizers, the Belarus and Russia are the major fertilizers exporters. So let's say they can't, Brazil cannot buy right now fertilizer from Russia, it's example. And Brazil and Argentina is the major producers of the soy. Soy is the animal feeding, and the China buys from Brazil and Argentina. Because of the fertilizer problem, they can't produce more. China cannot buy it. So Chinese meat sector will be significantly impacted. So it's a kind of chain effect because we are so much connected with the global food trade. It was not like that 50 years ago, but now it is. So that's
true. But sometimes it works in the other direction too. For example, although I'm hearing what you say, I don't want to have my Russian friends go hungry. On the other hand, the shutting off of oil and gas, but mostly oil, to Europe I kind of think, okay, go ahead and do it, because now it's going to force Europe to adopt new, more stringent methods of reducing emissions. They're going to switch over quicker to sustainable energy. And in fact, Bill McKibben gave a talk a couple of weeks ago saying that, instead of sending Stinger missiles and Javelin weapons and stuff, we should not instead, but we, let's also fill the ships with heat pumps and insulation and that sort of thing, so that we can get Europe into a situation within 6 months, so that by October they can get along with all that, without all that gas and oil that they've been importing from Russia. Now that's, it has that beneficial effect on global warming, theoretically, potentially. But then at the same time, you have to say, well, what is going to be the effect on poor people in Russia who,
I tell you something. It's very good Bill McKibben gave the suggestions. But rather than doing this, you know what Europe has started doing it? They are returning to biofuel again. Biofuel is a kind of biological plant-based fuel, which is corn and soy, all kind of things, where they get from Africa. So there was a serious problem about the food security in Africa, because many of the fertile lands were transformed to biofuel for Europe. Mm-hmm. And then the Europeans understood the trouble and they reduced this biofuel production. Now they are coming back because of the gas prices. So what will happen, United States? You think United States send an insulation to Ukraine? No, they're going to start to dig in the oil in the Alaska and the famous, shale oil, what they come from fracking. They're going to start that. I'm happy that it's a good suggestion. Bill McKibben said that. That's not going to happen, because this would be a cheaper for them. Just going back to oil and gas, producing
yes,
more.
But I'm not even sure there's enough that they can quickly enough get the oil and gas there. Now, really, this is a logistics challenge that I can't, and I bet nobody that I know can actually.
We don't know.
No,
yeah, I don't know either.
Yeah. But it would be wonderful if we could say there's a silver lining to the war, that it helps people switch over and quicker adjust to the reality that we have to adjust to anyway, the urgency. In fact, I'm vastly more worried about climate change than I am about the potential for war now.
Yes.
Because I think the message we got less than a week ago, or about a week ago, was, look, we've been telling you, now this is the last chance, the IPCC.
Another problem is that silver lining is not really silver, or maybe now the arm industry is pushing very hard to this war. Nobody cares about how many Ukrainians are dying. They do care about how much weapon we're going to send to Ukraine to keep the Russia under control, this and that. The major exclusion of the greenhouse gas emission is in the military sector. Mm-hmm. If you look at all kind of climate change agreements, all the military operation is excluded.
That's right.
So what will happen is the jets are, flying, or tanks, and the environmental pollution in Ukraine right now is very dangerous. Ukraine is an agricultural country. Let's say the war is over. Next year, they started to plant their wheats. Mm-hmm. In this soil, the soil is not really clean enough. So what will happen in Ukraine? Significant impact for the future generations. If you remember what happened in Vietnam after Agent Orange, Generation after generations, people are bringing to the world disabled children, and rice production was significantly reduced because they were not able to sell the rice because of the dirty, polluted soil.
Well, you're saying that this current war is not just leaving debris, but also chemical pollution.
Yes,
Really?
serious.
Haven't read about that. Oh, and it's actually going to ruin the soil for a while. Oh.
So I 2 days ago or yesterday, New York Times has a very good report on that.
Really?
The water pollution, soil pollution, how did it affect a long time, what will happen in the future, and connected with the Vietnam War, again, reminding what happened in Vietnam. The impacts of war on the environment is unbelievably dangerous. And if you think about the Chernobyl was in Ukraine, and the Russians entered the Chernobyl, and Ukrainians told them, don't touch, this is very dangerous, but they didn't really pay attention. We don't even know what happened to these Russian soldiers who were in Chernobyl. We don't know.
Yeah. Well,
it is a crime.
Yeah, apparently they were digging trenches and exposing themselves to probably lethal. I mean, the guy said, well, you're not going to die this week, but you'll die in 20 years of cancer from it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, all of the message that you started with, which is that everything is connected to everything else. We have to say, address these things in a comprehensive way by looking at, I mean, you've just shown how whether or not we solve this war by negotiation and diplomacy or by Chernobyl punching holes in reactors is going to be pretty damn important, and it has an impact on food and everything else. Yeah. So I love the focus on addressing things in a comprehensive way, that we need a whole platform of reforms that take place all at once. But, the problem is people can only think about one thing at a time. The very fact that we're so preoccupied with this war means we're simply not even paying attention to the equally or more serious threat of global warming. And then, of course, all the other things like the reform of the United Nations that would be required to produce the kind of security system that would actually enable prevent these things from happening. If, for example, 8 years ago, if the International Court of Justice had been in a position to make a ruling on whether or not the Donbass republics should be allowed to separate or become autonomous or what, and if then the UN had a peacekeeping force that was able and willing and ready to go in and enforce that decision, was in a position to enforce the decision, this wouldn't have happened, because we would have had an authoritative system of solving these problems. So we have to set these things up, and yet our mind is so focused on one thing that we can't think of the other things.
Well, of course, most importantly, you are absolutely right. I fully agree with you. The system of the United Nations, as of today, is not capable to solve any problem. Because if you look at the 5 countries that sit in the Security Council with the veto power, so what kind of decision we are expecting from Security Council? China and Russia is there, or many of the cases, United States there against. So the system is under control of the winner of the Second World War. This winner of the Second World War has an upper hand. But now the geopolitics have changed. We don't have anymore this only 5 countries. We have big countries. We have India, we have Brazil, we have China. Of course, China is still in the Security Council. But that kind of system with the veto power blocking everything, and we can't solve anything because the system is based on powerful countries desire. There's no equality in the global world politics. If there's no equality in global world politics, one of the five countries are the aggressives, or one of the five countries, very good friends, are aggressive. So we can't solve any war.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we have to have a whole new world order.
Yes.
I'm talking to my friends and saying, let's get together and design one.
Yeah, that's good. But unfortunately, if you don't give enough power to big, powerful countries, now it's not bipolar, it's multipolar. Polar. We are not anymore Russia, US. This is over. This country, United States, doesn't understand. There is no more Cold War. We are in a different world. First, the Biden administration should understand we are not in the Cold War anymore, but they didn't get it yet. But anyway, that has to be based on current understanding and current problems like global warming, right? Yes. Getting rid of famine and hunger. 1 billion people cannot access to food, 1 billion. And 3.5 billion people, think about it, cannot access nutritious food. So malnutrition.
No kidding. You're saying 3.5 billion of the... Yes. We're nearly 8 billion now.
Yes, 3.5 billion, almost half of the world, cannot eat nutritious food, which is $5 a day. Mm. Can you support $5 a day? Half of the world cannot. Mm-hmm. They are okay, they are food secure, but not nutritiously healthy diet. Mm-hmm. So we didn't go even that part. Yeah. That's a very serious issue. Mm-hmm. So this issue has to be solved with the very strong global governing bodies that just equal and respect to everyone, not only the powerful one.
Well, but it looks to me as if the trend is in the other direction. Instead of becoming more world-minded, global-minded, we are having an upsurge in nationalism. And for example, just this week, I think Serbia and Hungary re-elected wings, and they're on, who knows, maybe Marine.
France right now, France. Yes.
Right? Yeah, on the verge, who knows? Yes, and that is really the in a way, maybe the first step, the first issue that we have to solve. And I think it's the hardest one because I have no solution in my own mind. I don't understand it. I only say the people who think that way are nuts, but that doesn't help. I have to have an answer. And just saying that they're stupid is not very helpful.
No,
I don't have a solution. Do you?
Well, you're right. I mean, we know what to do, but we know also what we cannot to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a very, as you said, this is the kind of first step of the anti-globalization. So countries will come into maybe regional powers would be a kind of helpful countries with each other, geopolitically, geographically, climatically together, economically together, regions, pockets here and there. Although European Union could not solve anything, maybe it was too big. I don't know, but this is not going to work for long term. So this war is a good sign of warning that a security system doesn't work in this world. We know the global warming was not working. We know that. We already know we can't solve the climate change. Now we see we can't solve the security issues.
Right. Mm-hmm. Boy, this is not the most cheerful conversation. Yes. I was hoping we were coming up with some new innovations that would help solve our problems. Do you have any good news? As somebody watching technological developments of in agriculture, let's consider whether some of the discoveries are going to be helpful at all and going in the other direction.
Well, technological solutions are important. And in agriculture, there are a bunch of them. But the issue is, again, we have to, is it possible to establish a system? All the people that all the producers, smallholder farmers, women, indigenous people, which they are surviving right now with their own production, are they able to access this very major technology without having any copyright or anything? Then yes. Then we have to, the technology should be equally available for everyone, not for the most powerful corporations, which right now, the global food system under the control of 10 governments and less than 10 corporations. Can we go like that? No. So technology.
I had a conversation a month or so ago between two people. I set it up as meaning to create a debate, because both of them had been on my show separately and had expressed contrary points of view. So I wanted to bring them together and see if they could solve it. And one of them was a guy named Tom Newmark, who has been the head of a corporation or something. And he's very interested in trying to promote regenerative agriculture. And he has a farm in Costa Rica that is using all kinds of wonderful techniques that really, it isn't high tech stuff. It's just learning how to handle things differently. And the other friend was Harriet Friedman, who is do you know
Good
Harriet?
Friend.
Oh, are you? Because she's a friend. Was my closest friend.
Yes,
we still are friends, but I don't see her very much anymore because she's always moving around. Anyway, I put them together, and it wasn't exactly a debate, but they certainly disagreed. I didn't come away with the feeling that we made any progress towards solving it. But what Newmark said that made me want to set this up as a conversation was that he felt that the corporations were going to be the major force making for changes that are beneficial, that regenerative agriculture is going to come in because the big food corporations will enforce it on farmers who produce for them, and that these corporations all realize that we're coming to a crisis, that our soil is being depleted and we can't keep it up because everything's going to rack and ruin in agriculture, and that they know that now there are different and better ways, things that would sequester carbon in the soil, that sort of thing. And he thinks that the corporations are going to be a positive force in making those changes happen. And Harriet totally disagreed, and we never really got it solved.
Absolutely, I agree with Harriet. It is impossible, especially if they are already keeping the whole bunch of power right now, less than 10 of them. So what is happening right now, we came to that position because of them. So nobody is going to give their profit if we keep them controlling without any regulations from the government, without any monitoring. They will sweep through the whole smallholder farmers. They become kind of slave of the big corporations. We don't want to live in that kind of world.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what kind of regulations should we be introducing? I don't think Harriet has proposed exactly what she had in mind about how to counter the situation. But what would you do if you were a legislator trying to develop ways of constraining these food corporations?
So first of all, you have to have an equal access to markets. So big corporations have a better opportunity to control the market. I think smallholder farmers should be cooperated together in order to compete with the big time corporations. So the most important thing is, how do we organize the local market together? They can be together, they can be much more powerful together rather than being smallholder farmers. Then they can produce together, they can share the technology, they can share the machinery, they can and then government should give them an enough incentivize to protect them against, for instance, with the insurance, against the climate change problems and everything. So when the climate has a problem, the smallholder farmers recover through the government help, because big corporations don't have any problem, so they take over the market. So you have to have the leveling the plain area, that every smallholders with the organizing together be the kind of equal partner with these global corporations. Mm-hmm. Then the localization is important, and people living and working, which is more than 1.7 billion people right now in the world, they are in the agricultural business. So 1.7 billion people in one side, less than 10 corporations in other side. So how do we balance this? Governmental regulations.
Okay. Now, how are you going to do that? Is there any organization that you know of that is trying to see how to orchestrate such a change? Because it sounds like it needs to be done on an international basis, and not just one country. There are 190 something countries now. I don't know how each government could do it separately. How would you go about getting from here to there?
Well, actually, IFAD is an important organization. Basically, there are three Rome-based organizations that dealing with this global food politics. One is FAO, the other one is World Food Program, and the third one is the IFAD. And there's a Committee of Food Security is giving the global global policy regulations to the government, but they are all voluntary.
Tell me about this third one, because I don't know. I didn't recognize.
International Food and Administration. Basically, they are in charge of to give credit to smallholder farmers. So IFAD is established for that kind of reason. But because of the communist countries are very much against any kind of cooperative action, because they were suffered during the Soviet period. The cooperations were under the control of the state. They don't want to be again cooperated with others. So that's an important hurdle that has to be kind of restructured, that the smallholder farmers would be willing to work together. So, for instance, La Via Campesina, it's a big-time organization for the rural peasants organization. They do work together. So that kind of being togetherness, being kind of cooperating, one way to make the local food system much more lucrative, much more sustainable, and the alternative to global food politics. So not corporations are dealing with everything, but there is still space for the small, for the local organizations and the big time global corporations. The way is to making, actually the governments are very important. International organizations can only do voluntary. They can't do the mandatory rules. So the states should step in to understand the self-sufficiencies are important, and global economic order highly exaggerated, that they cannot solve the problems in terms of crises like COVID, war, drought, climate change.
Well, I assume that you're saying that this IFAT is an independent organization and not connected to the UN, or
No,
maybe
no, it's a UN organization.
Is it? Oh, okay. But it's still, you're hopeful that it's the mechanism that might make the difference.
Yes.
Huh? Okay. Well, I'm glad to learn about that because I don't know the first thing about that. Now I do. I'll at least find out more.
But of course, it has to be together with other organizations, FAO and IFAD and the Committee of Food Security. They work together constantly.
Do they all think along the same lines now? Is there pretty much consensus about what policies should be promoted? Or is there...
Unfortunately, they also divide it to two. One is the more local smallholder farmers, agroecology. The other one is no, we have to be the scientific, regenerative, intensification of the production. So they are also divided.
Wow. Okay. Well, I need to learn a lot more, and I've given me some homework to do. This is very, very stimulating and very important. I'm so glad to have had this conversation.
Good.
I'd like to follow it up, if I may.
Okay.
Back to you.
Thank you,
so
Meta.
much. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Project Save the World produces one of these shows 3 days a week, sometimes more. This is episode 438. You can watch these or listen to them as audio podcasts on our website, tosavetheworld.ca. Eventually, we even post transcripts there. And when you get there to the website, look around. We have conversations going on there all the time about 6 global issues, plus potential reforms in governance, economics, and civil society. To find a particular talk show, enter its title or episode number in the search bar, or the name of one of the guest speakers. After you've watched or listened, scroll down and share your thoughts about the show with the other viewers. This is a place for dialogue, so please join in. I'll see you there.